Robert Irwin never planned on becoming a global television sensation. He never imagined himself under the dazzling lights of a ballroom stage, wearing tailored suits, spinning across polished floors while millions of households watched in admiration. Yet that's exactly where his life would light a path, so unexpected, even he still struggles to articulate it. Because for Robert, everything began where most people least expect a celebrity story to start, deep in the Australian wilderness. Barefoot, laughing, and holding a camera pointed toward crocodiles. Long before the headlines, before the nation voted him into the finals of Dancing with the Stars, Robert existed in a world entirely different from the one he would eventually conquer. His childhood was defined by nature-dusty boots, khaki shirts, and the legacy of one of the most beloved wildlife figures in history. But what many people still fail to understand is this: Robert's life has always been more than a continuation of a family name. His rise didn't happen because of who his father was. His rise happened because of who he chose to become. As he grew, audiences began noticing something quietly magnetic about him. Yes, he had the enthusiasm, the wide smile, the courage to pick up a python as casually as someone picking up a sandwich. But beneath that charm was a discipline that felt unusual for someone his age. He possessed a drive not desperate for fame, not hungry for attention, but deeply rooted in purpose. And that purpose shaped everything, even the things he never expected, including a whirlwind journey into a competition show he initially thought he would decline. The offer to join Dancing with the Stars arrived during a period when Robert was juggling wildlife conservation projects, travel schedules, and television commitments. To dance on a competitive stage felt strange, almost out of place for him. He wasn't a performer in the traditional sense. He wasn't chasing acting roles. He wasn't building a music career, and he certainly wasn't known for choreography. Yet when he received the pitch, "Let us show the world a different side of you," something inside him paused. The more he thought about it, the more he realized the show wasn't asking him to be someone else. It was asking him to reveal a part of himself the world had never seen. Somewhere beneath the khakis and wildlife documentaries was a young man growing into adulthood, discovering confidence, discovering vulnerability, discovering emotional expression. Dancing, he realized, wasn't about being perfect. It was about being human. So he accepted, and that decision would ignite one of the greatest chapters of his public life. The moment he stepped into the rehearsal studio for the first time, Robert felt something shift. The room smelled like rosin and sweat. Mirrors stretched across the walls, and speakers blasted music that he'd never imagined himself moving to. His partner, already a decorated professional dancer, smiled at him with a mix of anticipation and mischief. "Ready?" she asked. Robert laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Define ready?" From that moment, the transformation began. His first rehearsals were awkward. His timing was off. His posture was stiff. His footwork betrayed him more than once. But what stood out to his partner, the producers, and eventually the judges, was how quickly he adapted. Robert learned fast, not because he was naturally gifted in dance, but because he approached every choreography the same way he approached a new species he was studying, with curiosity, focus, and respect. Soon, people watching behind the scenes realized there was something extraordinary happening. The wildlife warrior was evolving physically, emotionally, and artistically. With every step he mastered, with every routine he polished, Robert unlocked a new version of himself. And viewers connected with that authenticity. They saw a young man trying, failing, learning, improving, and inspiring others along the way. The weeks flew by. The judges began praising him for his growth, his humility, and the surprising intensity that emerged whenever he performed. Robert wasn't pretending to be a dancer, he was becoming one. His body changed, his self-expression matured, his presence sharpened, and by the time the semifinals aired, millions of people had already decided they wanted him to win. But rising to the top of Dancing with the Stars wasn't the reward. The victory, when it came, was breathtaking, emotional, unforgettable. But it was only the beginning, because after the confetti fell, after the trophy was placed in his hands, the world began asking one question: what does Robert Irwin get after winning Dancing with the Stars? And the truth is this: he received far more than a trophy. He gained visibility that expanded his global audience by millions. He gained new opportunities, network deals, brand partnerships, international project offers that he never sought but suddenly had the power to choose. He gained a new sense of self, a deeper confidence, and an emotional maturity that came from stepping far outside his comfort zone. But the most important thing he gained wasn't material. It was a new chapter, a new identity, a new understanding of who he could become beyond the legacy, beyond the expectations placed on him since childhood. A shift that set him up for the biggest transformations of his career. And this story, Robert's rise from wildlife ambassador to global entertainment phenomenon, only grows more powerful from here. Because what he gets after winning Dancing with the Stars is bigger, more complex, and more life-changing than most people could ever imagine. He didn't just win a competition, he stepped into a completely new world. Winning Dancing with the Stars did not just elevate Robert Irwin. As celebrity status, it shifted the entire trajectory of his life. Long before he realized it, the show had already turned him into something more than a wildlife personality. America saw a new Robert, disciplined, artistic, emotionally expressive, and capable of commanding a stage with the same confidence he displayed while handling a giant python. But while the audience saw transformation through dance, Robert experienced something deeper, something life-changing, something he never expected. As the ballroom faded into darkness after the finale, he stood backstage holding the mirrorball trophy. The cheers still echoed in his ears, but his mind wasn't on the applause. It wasn't on the cameras or the headlines already being drafted by entertainment journalists. It wasn't even on the victory itself. Instead, he found himself thinking about the journey, how a boy who grew up surrounded by wildlife ended up conquering a stage he once believed he didn't belong on. And suddenly, he understood something powerful. Growth is never accidental. It happens when you allow life to push you into places that scare you. Robert smiled at his reflection, still catching his breath, still shaking from adrenaline and emotion. His partner hugged him, proud and teary-eyed, whispering, "You earned this." He nodded, but what he didn't know yet was just how much this moment would change his future. Because once he stepped out of that ballroom, once he crossed the threshold from contestant to champion, a door opened, one that had been silently forming from the moment he took his first dance step. The network executives were the first to notice. They saw his authenticity, his humility, and his natural ability to connect emotionally with viewers. In an era when audiences crave real, relatable personalities, Robert stood out. He wasn't manufactured. He wasn't chasing fame. His presence carried a sincerity that viewers rarely see in celebrity culture. And so, before he even left the studio that night, 3 different executives approached him with variations of the same message. "We want to work with you." Suddenly, Robert was being offered opportunities he never expected. Hosting roles, adventure series, nature meets reality crossover concepts, even drama-based projects that blurred the line between storytelling and documentary. For the first time, creative doors opened that had nothing to do with continuing his family legacy, and everything to do with expanding his own. But the most surprising opportunities came from outside the television world. Brand partnerships began flooding in, not the superficial kind, but high-level deals from companies that recognized the global potential of an environmentally conscious, charismatic young star. Robert found himself reviewing proposals for eco-travel campaigns, wildlife awareness commercials, global sustainability initiatives, and fitness endorsements, sparked by his physical transformation on the show. He'd always been athletic, but dance reshaped him, leaner, stronger, more expressive. Now, major brands wanted that energy connected to their image. Still, Robert refused any partnership that didn't align with his values. "I can't promote anything that harms the environment," he reminded his team, and he stayed true to that. His brand integrity made him even more valuable. Companies weren't just investing in a celebrity, they were investing in trust. Then came the part the public never saw, the emotional and psychological growth. Dancing forced Robert to communicate with his body in ways he never had before. Underneath the bright lights and choreography were moments of vulnerability he rarely showed the world. There were rehearsals where he questioned himself, where he felt inadequate, where he struggled to connect movement with feeling. But through dance, he learned to process emotion differently. He learned to channel grief, triumph, resilience, and joy into storytelling without words. A transformation began inside him that even his closest friends noticed. His confidence deepened, not the loud kind, not the superficial social media kind, but a quiet, mature confidence rooted in intentional growth. He walked differently. He spoke with more clarity. Interviews felt richer, more reflective. Robert wasn't just maturing, he was evolving. And with that evolution came something unexpected: global fan bases he never knew he had. Within weeks of his DWTS victory, his social media exploded. New demographics discovered him: dancers, fitness communities, reality TV fans, young adults, even audiences who barely knew him before the show. Overnight, Robert went from being the wildlife guy to a multifaceted public figure with international influence. Fans began creating edits, dance compilations, reaction videos, and behind-the-scenes breakdowns of his routines. His rise was no longer limited to wildlife channels, it spread into mainstream entertainment. But fame, as always, carries a shadow. Suddenly, everyone had an opinion. His love life became a subject of speculation. Paparazzi waited for him at airports. His quiet visits to wildlife reserves were disrupted by crowds wanting photos. Even his charitable work became magnified, something he wasn't used to. But Robert handled it with grace, because he knew fame was not the destination. It was a tool, a megaphone, a way to amplify the causes he cared about. And that is precisely where his post-DWTS journey takes its most meaningful turn. One offer in particular stood out to him: an invitation from one of the world's largest conservation organizations to lead a new global youth wildlife ambassador initiative. They believed Robert's platform, especially after the show, could inspire millions of young people to connect with nature. His team told him the role was symbolic, more like an honorary title, but Robert refused to let it be symbolic. If he accepted, he wanted real work, real impact, real change. This wasn't just another opportunity. This was his calling. But as he navigated these new roles, the media began to ask the same question again and again. What does Robert Irwin get after winning Dancing with the Stars? The public assumed the answer involved fame, wealth, sponsorships, and new career lanes. And yes, those things came, but they weren't the real story. The real story was still unfolding. The rebirth of a young man discovering his identity beyond legacy, beyond expectations, beyond the shadow of his father's larger-than-life influence. Winning Dancing with the Stars didn't define Robert, it unlocked him. It gave him the courage to explore sides of himself he had never embraced. It connected him to an audience that saw him as more than a conservation figure. It proved that authenticity still wins in a world obsessed with trends. And most importantly, it set the stage for the next chapter. The chapter where he becomes a global figure whose influence reaches far beyond a dance floor. Because what he gains next is the part nobody expected. When the cameras shut off, when the confetti settled, and when the final interviews aired, Robert Irwin stepped into a world that was suddenly watching him more closely than ever before. Winning Dancing with the Stars placed him in a spotlight he did not chase, but gracefully accepted. Yet the true weight of that spotlight would reveal itself in the weeks that followed, a new reality shaped not by fame, but by purpose. The morning after the finale, Robert woke to thousands of messages: fans, family, celebrities, producers, conservationists, old friends from school who hadn't spoken to him in years. The world was celebrating him, but amid the applause, one message stood out, above all. A simple text from his sister Bindi: "Dad would be so proud of you." Robert read it over and over until his eyes blurred, not because of grief, but because of realization. His life had been shaped by legacy, shaped by expectation, shaped by a figure who continues to influence millions. But at that moment, he finally understood something that would guide him through everything that came next. He wasn't carrying his father's legacy anymore, he was expanding it. And that expansion would take him into continents, boardrooms, and global stages he never imagined entering. The first major shift came 2 weeks after his win, when a top streaming platform offered him a multi-year deal to host and produce a nature documentary misadventure travel series. It wasn't just another wildlife show. It was a hybrid concept, blending environmental storytelling with cinematic exploration. Something meant to appeal to younger audiences who no longer engage with traditional documentaries. Robert didn't just accept the role, he asked to help shape the creative direction. He pitched ideas, exploring endangered ecosystems through the eyes of local communities, documenting the emotional stories of conservationists on the front line, merging dance-influenced movement sequences into storytelling to reflect his personal evolution. Executives loved it. Suddenly, Robert wasn't just a presenter, he was a creator, a visionary, a filmmaker in the making. The next shift came from the business world. A global athletic brand approached him with a partnership, not just to model, but to co-design a line of eco-friendly performance wear inspired by the fluidity and discipline of dance. The brand wanted to leverage his transformation on the show to introduce a message that conservation and fitness could coexist in sustainable product development. Robert agreed, but only under one condition: every item must be made from recycled materials and must support wildlife protection funds. They agreed. Robert had no idea yet, but this collaboration would go on to become one of the most successful limited edition athletic releases of the year, selling out within hours and raising millions for conservation projects. But the biggest change wasn't financial or professional, it was personal. Winning pushed Robert to confront parts of himself he rarely acknowledged. His entire life had been rooted in responsibility, to his family, to the zoo, to conservation, to the millions who saw him as the next chapter of a beloved legacy. Dance forced him to explore joy for himself. It forced him to reconnect with his own desires, his own creativity, and his own dreams outside of duty. People around him began noticing the shift. He carried himself with more ease. His laughter was richer, unburdened. He embraced opportunities he once felt unworthy of accepting. He learned to say no to expectations that boxed him in. He learned to say yes to passions that lit him up. And with this personal transformation came another unexpected development: a deepening of his emotional connections. Robert's partner from the show became a close friend, someone who understood the pressure of being watched, the vulnerability of performing, and the thrill of growth. They remained in touch long after the finale, encouraging each other, sharing creative ideas, even meeting to dance occasionally for fun. Their connection wasn't romantic despite the tabloids insisting otherwise, but it was meaningful. A friendship forged under the intensity of weekly elimination pressure and artistic collaboration. But there was someone else who entered Robert's life during this time, someone whose relationship with him would eventually spark headlines and speculation. She wasn't from the entertainment industry. She wasn't a dancer. She wasn't famous. She was a conservation photographer he met during filming of his new documentary series. They bonded over a shared love of nature, storytelling, and purpose-driven work. Their friendship deepened slowly, organically, far away from cameras. For the first time in a long time, Robert allowed someone to know him beyond the public image. This emotional shift became the foundation for one of the most powerful things he gained after winning Dancing with the Stars, a life that finally belonged to him. But the world's interest in him also meant the world wanted answers. And the biggest question remained: what does Robert Irwin actually get after winning Dancing with the Stars? What does victory give someone who never wanted the spotlight? The truth is profound. He didn't just get fame. He didn't just get endorsements. He didn't just get opportunities. He got global influence. Influence that transformed conservation efforts. Influence that opened new creative lanes. Influence that connected him to audiences far outside the wildlife world. Influence that allowed him to bridge entertainment with environmental purpose in a way no one had done before. Winning DWTS gave him the platform to reach people who would never have watched a traditional wildlife documentary. It brought teenagers, young adults, and mainstream entertainment fans into his world. People who would now listen when he spoke about endangered species, climate issues, and conservation funding. His social media became a tool for education. His interviews became platforms for advocacy. His global visibility became a new weapon in the fight to protect nature. This is what he gained: a louder voice, a broader audience, a deeper impact. And as months passed, something incredible happened. Robert Irwin became not just a television personality, not just a conservation figure, not just a reality show champion. He became a cultural connector, a bridge between worlds that rarely intersect: science and entertainment, conservation and dance, legacy and reinvention. But perhaps the most beautiful part of all was the private realization that settled within him as his journey continued. He didn't win Dancing with the Stars to change what others thought about him. He won because the journey changed what he thought about himself. He discovered he was allowed to evolve. He discovered he was allowed to dream beyond expectations. He discovered he was allowed to be more than one thing: a conservationist, a performer, an advocate, a creator, a human being still figuring out life. The true prize wasn't the mirrorball trophy. It was freedom, growth, identity, purpose, and a future far larger than he ever imagined. Robert Irwin didn't just rise, he transformed, and his story is only beginning.